Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are starting Mesechtes Maasros, Yerushalmi Maasros. That's Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph, Daf Aleph. I would like to open up by connecting the opening to the siyum that we made yesterday. When we made this siyum yesterday, there were a few things that should have been shared, that at least some of it we'll share right now. But first of all, Mesechtes Maasros, the word Maaser means to tithe. Interestingly, Maaser includes in it Truma. Actually, the opening rules of the Mishnah about the Klal Amru B'Maasros, that there are three criteria needed to know whether something is included in the obligation of it being tithed or not. The Mishnah, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, put this in Mesechtes Maasros. The Rambam will write these rules in Hilchos Truma, because Maasros doesn't only mean Maaser Rishon or Maaser Sheni. Maasros is a generic word that includes in it all of the tithings, beginning with Truma Gedolah. Now we have in Bavli Tainas Daf Tes Amud Aleph. It begins in Daf Ches Amud Beis that Amar Rabbi Yochanan Aser Ta'aser, right? The pasuk that we read in Parshas Re'eh. So what's the double expression? So that's the limud, that Aser Bishvil Shetis Asher, that when a person gives Maasros, they become wealthy. And the Gemara relates the story of the Yenuka of Reish Lakish, one of Reish Lakish's younger children, that Rabbi Yochanan once met him, and Keminig, you ask a child, Eima li psukayich, and that's almost like a nevuah, as the Gemara tells us elsewhere. And ultimately, Rabbi Yochanan told this Yenuka, this limud, that Aser, Ta'aser, double expression means that when you give Maasros, you become wealthy. Aser, Bishvil. And noch bishvil means ke'ilu, do it shaloi lishma. Do it in order for you to become wealthy. And this child pushed back. Ultimately, he told Rabbi Yochanan another pasuk where it says, Lo yisenasu es Hashem Elokeichem, we're not allowed to test God. To which Rabbi Yochanan responds that you're right, we're not allowed to test God. Chutz mizu, here we are allowed to test God. And he quotes the pasuk in Malachi that that the Torah is foretelling that when we are going to bring that actual Maasros into the Beis Hamikdash or to the Kahanim, to the Leviim, so that says Ubechanuni navazois. God is saying, please test me. Im lo yeftach harubeis hashamayim, v'harikois yilochem bracha ad b'li dai, ad sheyivlu sifseisechem eloimer dai. Okay, that's the dai. That's our nigan. So there's an idea of Maasros connected to wealth. And I just want to open this up by connecting it to the siyum of Mesechtes Trumos for those of us who learned it. It's a very deep siyum. We learned a statement from an Amoida that I don't remember ever having, Amar Rab Nisa. That's a miracle. Says Rebbe, miracle. And he opens up by saying, Ano loichakim la'aba. I never knew my father. But my mother, Ima, Havas Amrali, my mother told me that my father would say, don't forget, father is Kuchabrichu, mother is the Shechina. There's a lot of depth in that. And the topic we were learning was if a person has Truma Tameya, that the rule is, at least rabbinically, that the only one who can derive benefit from it being burnt up is the Kohen. There's a prohibition for a Yisrael deriving benefit. And the Masechta ended by telling us that his mother quoted his father of saying that Bidi Eved, an orphan is a Bidi Eved. He had no father. That Bidi Eved, if you don't have Shem and Chulin, me, a Yisrael, is allowed to use Shemen of Truma, Temeya, to light the mitzvah of the Chanukah menorah, even though there's no Kohen around. And I was thinking about it. This is the ultimate hisapcha. This is the ultimate transformation, where we're taking a Yisrael is not allowed to have any contact with Truma. Truma is holy. A Yisrael cannot benefit from Chulin. And somehow, dafka, because there was something lacking, which is what makes a person does tshuva, can you reach a level where you are allowed to take something that otherwise you would not be allowed to use, and you can use it. In other words, the ultimate wealth, we're not talking about material wealth. Everyone should be material wealthy. That's not the point. The point is that there is using that which you could use in the service of Hashem. And then there's you being given permission to take something that you were not allowed to use in your avodah. That's the ultimate wealth, that you have access to something that you never had access to. And I think that's the ultimate lesson is that the inyan of Maasros, Asher b'shvil t'shetis Asher, for sure on a material level, but the ultimate wealth is for us to somehow b'di'evid that we are already in golus, b'di'evid that we already got involved in things that we are not allowed to get involved in, that what's the chela of the Baal Tshuva, that he's able to elevate the sparks even from the Shalosh Klipas HaTameis post facto. That's the ultimate asher, tis asher, and we'll share more when we'll make the siyum in the shul, God willing, the Shabbos. Okay, now a couple of big rules, and for those of us who have been on this merit, on this ride of learning Yerushalmi, we are familiar, but just to repeat the following. First of all, there's a big machlokes rishonim as to what items are biblically obligated to be tithed. Tithed, again, including all of the maasros, Truma Gedolah, Maaser Rishon, Trumas Maaser, Maaser Sheni, or Maaser Oni. You have Rashi and Tosfos are of the opinion, and many other rishonim, that only Dagan, Tirosh, V'Yitzar, we just learned this in Masechtas Trumos, which are explicitly spoken out on Parshas Emor, which is grain, the 5 grains, and oil and wine. And according to many, not olives and grapes, but oil and wine. These are the only items that have to be tithed midoraisa, and all else has to be tithed midrabanan. Then you have other rishonim, and actually from the pshat of the Gemara that we will learn today, even though whenever you have limudim, you can always say, it's only an asmachta. But as we will see today, it appears from our Gemara Yerushalmi that not only do all fruits have to be tithed midoraisa, even legumes have to be tithed midoraisa. The only item that only has to be tithed midrabanan are vegetables, yirakos. And I want you to know that there is a Yereim, the Rishon. He is the most stringent. He holds that even yirakos have to have Maaser Sheni removed from it midoraisa. The Yereim separates Maaser Sheni from the other Maasers, and we'll bring him up later on in this Masech. But just to be aware that there is a debate, what has to be tithed midoraisa, what has to be tithed midrabanan. That's one area of argument. There is another area of argument, and don't confuse one with the other. Whatever it is that has to be tithed midoraisa, that's only when when Yehoshua led our people into the Holy Land up until the end of the Bayis Rishon. Then whatever it is that has to be tithed doiraisa needed to be tithed doiraisa. And all else was midrabanan. However, we paskin that kedusha l'shoina kitchel l'shaita v'loy kitchel l'asad lavai, which means that Yerushalmi in HaKodesh, which means the Beis Hamikdash, that place never lost the kedusha. So things that are connected to Yerushalmi remains the same whether the temple is standing or not. But when it comes to kedusha haaretz, when the first Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, there was a diminution in the kedusha haaretz. Now the question is, did it return bisman ba'yeshem? When Ezra, under the leadership of Ezra, when we resettled the land, and that was not a kinyan of kibush, it was a kinyan chazaka, as we spoke out many times. And here there's a big machlokes, min hakotza el hakotza. Either that when we entered Eretz Yisrael the second time, we re-imbued the land with holiness, and that is mechayev for us to separate trumas u'maasros midoraisa, and even after the Churban Beis Hamikdash it remains, or there was no obligation for Ezra to re-imbue the land with that kedusha. Actually, kinyan chazaka is weaker than kibush. If not for him choosing to imbue it with the kedusha for maasros, even bisman ba'yesheni, the chiyuv only would have been midrabanan, but he did choose to give it that level of kedusha, contingent on there being a temple. And once the second Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, then trumas u'maasros is midrabanan. So remember that. That means even on Dagan, Tirosh, V'Yitzar, when the Gemara Yerushalmi was written, as we learned in Masechta Trumos, the Gemara keeps on going back to that the chiyuv to begin with is midrabanan. But these are two different types of derabanans, and it's consequential. It's almost like tithing vegetables after the Churban Bayesheni is like a double derabanan. The chal there's no chiyuv. And even when there is a chiyuv, it's not on vegetables. And that bear that in mind. And again, if you're going to have lemudim throughout the Gemara, otherwise, you can always explain that to be only an asmachta. The big rules that we will learn today in the opening daf, and in Yerushalmi it's daf aleph, is first of all the 3 criteria or the 3 qualifications needed for produce to be obligated to be tithed. And remember them. Now, if you remember in Masechtas Peah, for Peah we had 5 rules. Here there's only 3 rules. And when we learned Peah, we spoke this out. But now we're learning here. Let's just focus on the 3. Number 1, oichel. Oichel means food that's fit to be eaten by human beings. That's the meaning of oichel. We just finished learning that food that is eaten by animals, b'chlal, does not have to be tithe. More, we learned that food that's fit to be eaten by humans, if it was designated as truma, it may not be given to animals because you're degrading it, even though we had exceptions for that. Right? The bitter vetch, the karshinim, and maybe the tilson, the fenugreek, according to Rabbi. But let's leave that on the side. Oichel. Another thing about oichel, and I'll speak it out right now. There are two words, there are two expressions of Chazal that we have to have clear, not to confuse one with the other. One is called oinas hamaisves. The other one is called gemar melacha. They mean very different things. Oinas hamaisves means the tithing stage. The tithing stage, oinas hamaisves, means that, let me give you a mashal, almost by all fruits, that before a fruit reached a third of its maturity, before grains reaching a third of their maturity, also the same would mean before fruits have seeds that are potent enough to be replanted and to successfully produce another tree, or to stimulate the earth to produce another tree, even if someone designated that as maisres, which means truma, maiser, etc., it will be ineffective because it's not oichel. It's not oichel. It's not yet fit for human consumption. That is what oichel also includes. And just to finish the sentence, that's oinas hamaisres. Gemar malacha means something else. That if something reached, it's already oichel. Even though it's oichel, even though you already harvested it, prior to it reaching its completion, prior to it being completed or ready to be merchandised, or it entered your home, Ri'iyas Panei Habayis, prior to that stage, you're not obligated to tithe it. If you tithe it, it will be effective, but you're not chayiv to tithe it. And therefore, you are allowed to snack from it. Chilas aray. Once something reaches its gemar malacha, you're not even allowed to snack from it. So there's oinas hamaises, is prior to which you're not obligated. And if you do it, it's not effective. Gemar malacha means prior to gemar malacha, you're not obligated, but if you did it, it will be effective. Don't confuse one with the other. So that's rule number one, oichel. I'm just using oichel. If it didn't reach oinas hamaises, it's not even called oichel. Rule number two is nishmar. Nishmar means it's produce that's protected by its owner, which means hefker produce is not obligated to be tithed. And we're going to have some details about this today in the daf. Which means, I want you to know a big rule, that even if something was only hefker for a moment, and it was reacquired, even by the original owner, since it was hefker, it's excluded from the whole dinei maisres. Now, there's some nuance to that. If someone was mafkir the produce when it was still connected to the ground, when something is connected to the ground, even if you were to declare it to be trumas or maisres, it would be ineffective. It's not shayach. It's like before oinas hamaisres, when it's connected to the ground. So if and when it was mechuber lakarka, you were mafkir it, and then you reacquired it, that hefker has no consequence. It doesn't do anything. But once something was detached, which means it was shayach to be designated as maiser, if you were mafkir it, so now it was nitcha. It was excluded midinei trumais. Once it was nitcha, you cannot re-include it in the obligation of tithing, even if you reacquire it. This is a very important line that we'll have today in Daf Aleph. The third rule is gidul of min haaretz. It has to be something that grows from the ground. I mean, not only does that exclude meat or fish or eggs, I'm talking about it excludes even the truffles and mushrooms, right? Hilchas brachos that come from a tree, but they're not rooted in the earth. We halachically understand them to derive their nourishment more from the air primarily than from the ground, which is why by brachas you make a shahakol, that these things are excluded even rabbinically from the Torah of Trumas U'Maisros. So this is the big Mishnah that we're going to have today, and we'll see how far we'll get into the sugya. That I want you to know that Maiser, where do we know that Maiser obligations are not from Hefker? How do we know that? Because we're going to have a limud in the psukim connected to Maiser, that Maiser has to be taken from something that you, meaning the owner, has ownership in, and the Levi doesn't. Don't forget, Chavre, the Shevet Levi was not given a portion when the land was conquered under Yehoshua. It doesn't mean Levium and Kohanim did not own land, but there was no Nachla. Nachlas, Eretz Yisrael, was not given to the whole Shevet of Levi. Now, items in which the owner and the Levi have equal ownership, like Hefker. Hefker is allowed to be given to all. And by the way, it's not just Hefker, right? We learned Leket Shik Chompeya, which is only for the poor. But here, which poor can take Leket Shik Chompeya? The owner, any poor person. There is no difference between a Levi and another Jew. In items in which the Levi and the other Jew is not separated, when they have the same rule, there, those items bechlal are not included in the Toitus of Maasros. That will be, I think, the big rule that we will conclude Daf Aleph. And without any further ado, Chavra, let's go. Amachaya Daf Aleph Amad Aleph Klal Omru B'Maasros. All right, says the Mishnah. Klal Omru B'Maasros. These are the three criteria or the three qualifications. Number one, for something to be included in the Torah of Maasros, it has to be what we call an oichel. Oichel means oichel adam. Oichel adam, as we mentioned, look inside the top Mana folder for those who are new. We do not have the classic Rishonim in Yerushalmi. We actually, the oldest Achron is the Rashirilio, which is in the bottom. The only one that has a comment on all of Yerushalmi is the Pnei Moshe. But we're going to learn where Rashi normally is the Mara Fulda, the top cloud. Amru b'Maasros kol shu oichel. What does Rabbeinu HaKadosh mean to exclude with that? La'afuke, just as an example, satis. Satis is salt flour. You know, he's speaking about items that people don't eat. She'elu einam oichel. He's giving a chiddush about this satis. Again, in English, salt flour. Afa pisha nechalam aladei atchak. Even though people could eat it if they're very hungry, but it's not called bona fide regular human food. Therefore, they are exempted from the whole Torah of Maasros. And that would mean that even if the owner declared, this is Truma, this is Maaser Rishon, his words are ineffective. Keep your finger in the Marafulda, back in the Mishnah. The second qualification is Nishmar, an item, food that's protected by its owner. Says the Marafulda, 3 lines from the top, V'nishmar, La'fukei hefker she'ein lahem ba'olim she'yishmerenu. Something that has no owner. And as we mentioned in our words of introduction, if there was a moment after it was detached in which it was declared halachically to be hefker, even if it was reacquired and now it has an owner, it remains completely exempt from the Torah of Maasros. Back in the Mishnah, the third rule is the gidulav min ha'aretz, something that grows from the ground. Here is where the Marafulda writes 4 lines from the top, la'fuke kemeyinu pitriyos, truffles and mushrooms. And for the record, he already writes, everything is learned from Sukkim. And again, people jump. They say, if it's learned from Sukkim, if we have to exclude Kemeyim and Pitriyos, does that not mean that all other items that grow from the ground are obligated biblically to be tithed? Again, it's a machlokes Rishonim. And those Rishonim like Rashi and Tosfos that hold no, only Dog and Tirosh ve'Yitzar, they will understand all these psukim to be an asmachta. But that's not the mashmois of the Gemara Yerushalmi. It appears from the Yerushalmi that bisman that the chiyuv is midoi raisa. The chiyuv includes all that grows, mamish. The only thing that's excluded midoi raisa are vegetables, even though vegetables are gidul of min haaretz. So says the Mishnah that if it's all the three, it's oichel and nishma and gidul of min haaretz, chaya b'maasros. Now zok the Mishnah v'oid klal acher amru. Another big rule, I take out the word big because sometimes the Mishnah writes klal gadol, right? We have on Shabbos klal gadol. Here it's klal. And we learned together in the Gemara, when do we say klal gadol? When do we say klal stam? If you have an item that even prior to its reaching its full maturity, it's already edible. This includes basically vegetables. That's the way it works. Even though people would leave it in the ground for it to grow bigger, but from when it becomes a metzias, it's already considered an oichel. Okay, and there are some few fruits that also fall in this category. The Mishnah wants to know what were to happen if someone harvested this item prior to its reaching its full maturity. So it's not about full maturity, it's whether it's edible in its current state. So if something is food already from the beginning, even though people don't normally harvest it when it's very little, what do? They leave it in the ground. Why do they leave it in the ground? To make it into, there should be more. So here says the Mishnah, even if someone harvested it earlier on, even though it's small, even though it didn't reach the stage in which normally people leave it in the ground or leave it connected, doesn't matter. Why? Because it's oichel. And that comes to it now. Why is this an oid klal acher amru? We'll speak about it more in the Gemara. In other words, this is not mamish oichel. This is another klal. But something that when it begins to develop is not called food. All right, this is what we would call prior to oines hamaisris. Even though at some point, when it becomes a third, when it becomes big enough, where this is most of the fruits, then it's an oichel. So the din is if you harvest it, if you cut it off the ground prior to its reaching that stage, and this is including prior to oines hamaisris, it will be exempt completely from maisris. And even if you designated it as maisris, it will be in effect. Okay, so we learned the Mishnah. Says the Gemara. Klal omru b'maislis. Remember, oichel, nishmar, gidulav min haaretz, guys. These are the rules. Where do we get this from? Says the Gemara, says the Braisa. We're quoting a pasuk from Parshas Re'eh. If you have with you on Torah Oira Shalom, I'm going to read the entire pasuk. Aser ta'aser eis kol tfu azarecha hayoytze hasad shana shana. Okay, so says the Braisa. Eis kol tfu azarecha hayisi oimer. Reading this pasuk, I would think that kol hadvarim yochayavim b'maisas. Okay, and therefore Talmud loimer eis kol tfuas zarecha, and tfua. What does tfua mean, guys? Grain, right? So the Torah begins by saying that tfua is something that's obligated in maisas. Tfua means grain, only 5 grains. So now, based on that, yochel lo yu chayavim b'maisas. Only tvua, not legumes, not fruits. Now, don't jump and shout, what about Tirosh and Yitzhar, a pasuk in Emor? This Braisa is not addressing that, but we already just mentioned in the intro that even when it comes to olive oil and to wine, according to many Rishonim, grapes and olives are taka not chayiv in maisves. So when you turn it into wine, when you turn it into oil, that's something else. But that's an exception. Coming back over here. In other words, we're going to use the word, you got a prat, right? Tvua. So you would think it's only tvua. So the Torah says at the end of this verse, hayoytze hasada shana shana, hayoytze hasada, that which the field produces, that's called a prat and a klal. Okay, something that is yoytze hasada. So continues the Braisa. So if that's the case, hayoytze hasada should include mamash everything. Now in seeds, there are 2 categories. There are 2 halachic categories of seeds. For those of us who learned the Rambam, we're very familiar with it. You have edible seeds, and you have seeds that are inedible, but they are used for planting. And this Braisa is based on the premise that seeds that are edible, it's amazing, are included. Let's go even doiraisa. But seeds that are not edible are excluded from the Torah of Maisves. The question is, why not? If you have the words hayoytze hasadeh, so hayoytze hasadeh should include anything, everything that grows. So we're going back. Yeah, shkoyach. You have a klal, but before the klal you have a prat. Ksivit says tfua zarecha. Tfua means grain. Taket says hayoytze hasadeh shana shana. So haketzad, how do you reconcile toil mi bentayim davar shu oichal v'nishmar? It has to be ke'ein haprat. Ke'ein haprat will mean oichel. Oichel excludes the seeds that are inedible, and nishmar means to have a owner because tfua has an owner. It's not an item that people are mafkid. Now it sounds from our braisa that this is a prat uklal, but really all of the Noisei Kelim point out and this is more elaborated in the Bavli, that it's understood to be a klal prat uklal. It's understood to be a klal. The word, now where is the first klal? It's a bit late, so it's not so simple, but you have another klal here. Sometimes, even though it's not formulated in the Torah as a klal, prat uklal, but if you have two words that are klal and one word that's a prat, sometimes in Torah Shebal Peh, you put the prat in between the klal. This is understood to be a klal uprat uklal, and we just a few daf ago in Trumos, even though it was not the same, but klal uprat uklal is that which we say in the Braisa of Rabbi Yishmael. This is midavav, and there the Braisa tells you the formula that I atodon el ke'ein haprat. And what's the ke'ein haprat? Oichel and nishmar. It's amazing how this Braisa doesn't say Gidul of Min Haaretz. I don't know why. But that's the Oichel V'Nishmar. And again, according to Rashi and according to Tosfos in the Bavli, even though it sounds like that we are including all Oichel and Nishmar, they understand all of this to be an asmach, because they stand firm based on another pasuk where the Torah is speaking about Truma, where the Torah is saying that what has to be given, and that also will include Maisres, only Dagan Tiroy Shen Yitzah. Now, says the Gemara, is the Goyen Mishma'ana Min Hadar. There's another Braisa. There's another way of coming to these criteria, to these qualifications. And that's also beginning with Aser to Aser. Now here clearly, Aser to Aser, that's the cloud, the first cloud. I almost like hide everything. A is called Tfuah Zarecha Prat. That's a klal uprat. When you have just a klal uprat, the rule is Ein B'chlal Ela Masher B'prat. So there you go. What's Masher B'prat? The Oichel V'Nishma. Ein Ela Tfuah. Kitni is Minayin. Again, we're going to go with the pshat that our Braisa is understanding that even Kitni has to be tied Midoi Raisa. Wow. Because if Ein B'chlal Ela Masher B'prat, Tfuah and Kitniers are considered complete two different categories. So the Torah says, and here this Braisa is bringing a verse from Parshas Bechol Koisai. And I'm going to read the whole pasuk over there. It's towards the end of the whole Chumash. V'chol masar ha'aretz mizera ha'aretz and mipri ha'etz lahashem hu kodesh lahashem. Amazing. And that includes the dinam of Trumas u'Maises. So again, Talmud, v'chol ma'aser ha'aretz mizera ha'aretz. We'll stop over there. Mizera ha'aretz zera. So that zera comes to include zera shum, seed of garlic, the zera of shichlayim, the seeds of cress, and the seeds of gargeir, seeds of a legume called a rocket. The three seeds have a commonality, my friends, that they are all edible. That's called oichel, the pshat of oichel. You can eat it. Imagine. So we have from the pasuk of Re'ei, we only have a klal uprat. A klal uprat, so then the rule for that is ein b'chlal ela masher b'prat. Ela masher b'prat. How do we include more from another pasuk in Parshas Bechol Kois? Daf Aleph Amud Beis. So now, if you have a inclusionary pasuk, the pasuk in Bechol Koisai, right, mizera haaretz. Why are you excluding inedible seeds? Asks the Braisa. Or Yachol, maybe, include more. Sha'ani marba, even zera luf ha'elyon. The word elyon here means wild luf. We had luf a lot in the previous Masechtas. And zera kedeshin, right, the seeds of leek. Zera bitzalim, the seeds of onions. Zera of turnips, of lefes. By the way, all of these are inedible seeds. And utzenoinois, radishes, and usha'ar zeironigina, even if they are she'enam nechalim. So why are you only including the edible seeds? So it says the Braisa, Talmud Laimad, the mem, zer haaretz means from the seeds of the ground. Not all, zer haaretz. And here we have our svara, our logic that we include edible because it's oichel. It fits more with the prat in Parshas Re'ei, right? Ein b'chlal ela masher b'prat, and we exclude those seeds that are inedible in their current state. Beautiful. Now let's keep on going with the pasuk in Bechol Koisai. The pasuk doesn't just say v'chol maser haaretz mizera haaretz. Then it says mipri ha'etz. Mipri ha'etz continues the Braisa. L'rabbis kol peiroi se'ilim. Get mashma from our Gemara, not an asmachta, that we're learning a brayso, that's understanding, right? Like the Rambam, who holds that all fruits, bisman, that there's a chiyuv, midoraisa, are chayiv, midoraisa, to be tight. You might think we're going to include fruits that are inedible. What would that be? Shita and salmoina and geroira are names of places which the earth there doesn't produce good fruits. I might even include the charuvim, the carobs, the buxin that grow in shita, that grow in salmona. I don't know why we write charuve again, but the Brayso separates shita salmoina from geroira. Maybe there are different levels of them being inedible. Maybe even include that. So here again, there is a mem. It doesn't say pri ha'etz. It says mi pri ha'etz. Kamalume pri ha'etz, which means v'loy kol peiros ilen. Now you're going to go off your rocker. Your rocker is minayin. Now where do we know that vegetables have to be tithed? So isi ben Yehuda oimer. Hamaisles li rocker is only midivreim. Here again, clearly it sounds from this brayso that everything other than Yerakos, where Isi ben Yehuda says is midrabanan, everything else is midoraisa. Because if everything else would have been also midrabanan, and these psukim are an asmachta, my dear friend, then Isi ben Yehuda would have said that there is no asmachta. But when he's saying vegetables is midrabanan, it's taka mashman. By the way, the Rambam will get it from here. That it's not unusual for the Rambam to pass like the Yerushalmi. Even though generally people have this rule, which is not such a big rule, Bavli, Yerushalmi, the halach is like the Bavli because halachi kebasra, not so, there's so many exceptions that it might not even be a rule, certainly not Ladam. Okay, so the oichel, my friends, here clear, I want to say the oichel does not include onions hamaisis. That was the second part of the Mishnah. The oichel means not in the Mishnah now. Now it's clear. Oichel means something which is edible, which means fruits that are inedible. Because they're bad quality fruits, like the charuvim, the buxer that comes from shita, salmoina, and geroira. Or zeroinen, seeds that are inedible. They are only good for planting. They are excluded. That's the oich. The second rule is nishmar. And here we're going to begin a whole journey. So nishmar, we learned in the Marafulda. What does it mean? Something has to be protected. That comes to exclude hefker items. And the key here is that it's not like it has to be currently hefker to be excluded from ISIS. No. Rab Chizda clarifies, Rab Chizda Amra, that hefker, one second. But even if it was only hefker for a moment, and then it was reacquired, since there was a moment in which it was hefker, it remains forever excluded from the obligation of ISIS. This is not Rab Chizda, that's a given. That which I just mentioned is going to be qualified by Rab Chizda. Rab Chizda Amar, hold on, not so simple, not a blanket statement. Because if hifkir kama, remember the word kama from Masechtas Peah, kama means before you harvested grain. It's called standing grain. Really doesn't only refer to grain. Kama would refer to any product that's still connected to the ground. Right, the apple is on the tree. If you were mafked when it was still kama, when it was still connected, which means you were mafked at a time that even if you would have chosen to designate it as truma or as ma'aser, it would have been legamre ineffective because it's connected. You can't designate that which is connected as trumas or ma'aser. So if you were mafked bisman that there wasn't even yet a chiyuv, that will have no consequence. So if you were mafked and you reacquired it all when it was still kama, hifker kama v'chazar v'zacha, while it's still a kama, the key is also you chazar v'zacha while it was still standing, and then the Gra takes out the word va'avar because it sounds like a b'di'evet. It's not a b'di'evet. And then you harvested it. It's obligated to be tithed. It's never excluded because from when it was shayich to be ma'aser, it was never excluded. It was never nitche. You understand? Then the hitfish mehen truma. Yes, hareizu truma. And the hitfish mehen means you have to be mafresh. Where do we say that if it was only hefker for a moment, it will forever be excluded from the dinam of maesters? That's only if hifker shibalin. Shibalin means you already harvested it. Even though you didn't remove it from its stalks. Even though you did not bring it to the gemar melacha, which is the meiruach. Even if those products that needs the iyas panei bias that we're going to learn a lot about, it didn't get there yet. So that's important. Once you harvested produce, even though you don't have to do it this second, but if you did it, it would have been effective. So that's what Rab Chizda is saying from the other end. It's not only if you made the Meruach, and we're going to learn later, once you made the Meruach, being mafked, it doesn't help. Once the Chiyuv was Chal, you can't undo it. But here you have Shibalim. So it's something that's Shayach to the Torah of Trumas U'Maisres. We're gonna just use the word Maisres. And even though it was only Hefker for a moment, Hifker Shibalim B'chazar V'Zacha B'hen. Now, the Hifker Sh'Vehem Truma, even if you chose to separate Truma, what you did is nothing. Einay Truma. Why not? That's the Nishmar. That's the klal of our Mishnah, because this was an item that was not protected by its owner. L'rega echad. This is it. Once you got this, you got the whole flow. Now, the Gemara itself on Rab Chizda, ma bein kama l'shibalim. So the Gemara explains. Rab Chizda explains. Kama, standing grain. Forget about being mafked. Not mafked. If you have standing grain, anything mechubar, and someone decides to designate it as truma sumaitis, it's nothing. Einay truma. That's the whole point. So since it's not included in the Torah of Maises, it cannot be excluded by you being mafked. Masha enkein, he doesn't, the Yerushalmi is always mekatzer, shibalin, if prior to you being mafked. And here you can write the words va'avad. Va'avad is not an aveda. Va'avad means you were not obligated, but you did it anyways. Va'avad, v'hifresh mehem truma. Right? If you separated truma somaisis bishibalim, what you did is effective. Hadesu truma. Beautiful. So only when something was included in the possibility of it being tithe, that will be excluded if you were mafkir it, because you can say it's not nishmar. Rab Chizda's Gavalik. Now we're going to open up and we're going to continue, God willing, tomorrow. Do we say the same thing by Hegdish? I'm going to tell you guys a rule. An item that's Hegdish is not to be tithed. The dinim of Maisres is not on produce that belongs to the Beis HaMikdash. How would produce belong to the Beis HaMikdash? Someone was magdish their field, the Bedek HaBayis. Now I want to know, if something belonged to the Beis HaMikdash, and then it was redeemed prior to the Meruach, are we going to say the same thing that Rab Chizda said, B'negeya Hefker? This whole Torah, that if it was Hefker for one moment, it's not going to be reobligated. If it was Hegdish for one moment, it's not going to be reobligated. Do we say if it was Hegdish while it was still connected, and it was redeemed while it was still connected, then it will be obligated? It's only if it was Hegdish for a moment when it was already Shibalim, and then you redeemed it. Now are we going to say, since it was Hegdish L'rega, it's no more included in the Torah of Maisves? In other words, are we going to compare Hegdish to Hefker or not? That's subject here to a machlekes between Rabbi Chinana and the Chachamim of the Gemara, the Chevra of the Gemara. And we'll just open this up. So Rabbi Chinana, b'shem Rabbi Chizda, the same Rabbi Chizda that explained to us or limited the Nishmar / Hefker exclusion. On one hand, the Chumrah, if it was Hefker for one moment, even though it was reacquired, it remains exempt. Chumrah doesn't have to be Hefker the whole time. But it's only if it was Hefker when it reached Shibalim stage. When it was still Kama, fact that it was Hefker doesn't do anything. So Rabbi Chinana has in his tradition that Rabbi Chizda himself said, Af behegdish came. In other words, if someone was magdish their field and there was standing grain, so even though it was hegdish, completely matured, but it wasn't harvested yet. If you then redeemed the field from the Bedek HaBayis, now you harvested the Tfuah, Rabbi Chinana says, Rabbi Chizda says, you are chayiv to be ma'aser. Ma'aser means everything. Truma, ma'aser, Truma so ma'aser. Why? Ayah was hegdish. No, it was hegdish at a moment that you could not have been magdish. You could not have separated Truma. When you designate Truma or ma'aser, comma, it's ineffective. On the other hand, if it was for one moment while it was detached, it was hegdish. Now someone was redeemed it before the Meruach, it will forever stay exempt. The rule of Hefker is the rule of Hegdish. So holds Rab Chinana b'shem Rab Chizda. Now, who argues with Rab Chinana b'shem Rab Chizda? The Chevra, the Rabbanim. How do we know that Rabbanan argue is what the Gemara will embark on a journey? It's not explicit, it's implicit. It's implicit. So from the following conversation, we know that from the words of the Rabbanan, we know that they argue. From the words, that's an expression, which means it's not like when Rabbi Chinana said, B'Shem Rabbi Chizda A, the Chachamim said, we disagree with you. It didn't work that way. The Rabbanan had words. They had a different topic, which we're going to learn in a moment. Different topic. From that, it's self-understood that they didn't accept Rabbi Chinana B'Shem Rabbi Chizda because what they're saying is premised on them arguing with Rabbi Chizda, as we'll see. So let's begin to learn their words. We'll see how far. Maybe we'll get a little bit into a daf base. We have another couple of minutes, and then we'll pick up tomorrow. So what did the Chachamim talk about? The Amar Rabbi Yochanan B'Shem Rabbi Yanai. So really, if you really want who are the Rabbanan is Rabbi Yanai. I mean, it began with Rabbi Yanai. Now we have a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh, and again, whoever has a Torah or Shalom, it's Geshmak. You read the whole pasuk, you understand it better. The pasuk, I'm reading the whole pasuk. It says, "Ubar HaLevi, why ki ein lo chelik v'nachal imach." The Haged, who also did not get a portion of the Holy Land. V'hayosem v'almon asher b'shorecha, v'achlu v'saveu, l'man yivarecha Hashem alekecha b'chol maasecha, b'chol ma'asiyotcha asher tas. So it's interesting, when it comes to the Ger, and to the Yosem, and to the Almanim, the Torah is not qualifying why they had rights to certain of the tithings, which they do. When it comes to the Levi, that's the source in Parshas Re'eh, where the Torah is explaining to you why is it that the Levi gets the Meiser Rishon, and we understand that imbued is the Kohen getting the Truma Gedoyla and Trumas Meiser, is because Ke'en Lechelet V'Nachala. But since he's not like the other Yidden, that's why he gets certain rights. Let's read now inside what Rabbi Yanai said. When it says, so says Rabbi Yanai, Mima, Sheyesh L'cha, only from that which you do have. Ve'ein loy, and he does not have. That's what the Torah is saying. He's not like you. That is from which you have to separate Meiser Rishon, and that includes the Truma Gedoyla. For that, at chayiv li'taloy. Mima sheyesh l'cha ve'ein loy. Now, what does that exclude a lot? That excludes leket, shikha, and peya. I'm sorry, I'm just reading leket. Yotza leket. We'll start with that. Leket is when you are harvesting tvua, one or two stalks can fall on the ground. That is something that you have to leave. And that belongs to the poor. Which poor? Doesn't matter whether you are an Ani Yisrael, Ani Levi, Ani Kain. In other words, who has rights over leket? Everyone equally. I know only the Aniyim, but there is no difference between At and the Levium. Sheyotcha v'yodei shavin boy. And really, he leket, he shikcha, he peya, he hefke. Gavaldik. So that is the limud. Look inside the Maraf folder before we go to that base. Just the last Maraf folder of that Aleph on the base, 4 lines from the bottom. The davar she'ein loy v'yesh l'cha, only from there at the chayv litin loy meiser. Umikan yalfinon the leket and shikha and peya peturim min hamaiser. Why? Because sheyesh loy v'lach or v'lacha chelik bohen and v'hu adin hefker yad sheneim shavin. So now. Okay, you know what, guys? I know we have a minute. I want to stop over here. Because all of this, guys, will lead us into Hegdish. I'm going to tell you how this leads us into Hegdish. Hegdish is something that no one has a right in. Hegdish belongs to Hashem. No one having a right in something also means something that your hand and the hand of the lady are equal. Not equal in the positive, equal in the negative. In other words, the same limud that excludes a hefker also l'choura should exclude hegdish. There is a but, and we'll speak that out when we pick up tomorrow on the base. Guys, a big mazel tov for all those of us, and Hashem should give us the health and the koyach, and for us, it's up to us and the determination to learn this entire Masechta. It's much shorter than the prior Masechta. I think it has daf mem vav dafim. B'chal the Babli. Whenever you have a daf, it's always less, right? Ksubas, someone made a siyum, a kufyud base daf, which means 111, right? Because it begins on that base. Here we have kuf zayin was trumais, not even having mem vav dafim. From Meisles to be continued.
Go ahead.
That's great.